Good morning. Welcome to UUCC, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua. We are a group of spiritual free thinkers who gather to celebrate life, build community, and better the world. Wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. I'm Laura Wink, your worship associate for this morning, and the service today is being led by our minister, Eileen Casey-Campbell. Yay. This service is also being live streamed to our YouTube channel. We plan to continue with hybrid worship services throughout the church year, so you can join us each week here in person, on Zoom, or later on YouTube as you prefer. If this is your first visit, welcome. We invite you to sign a visitor's book in the entryway. And whether it's your first visit or your 1000th, we're glad that you came. I have a few announcements to share. Please wear a mask. Masks are available for anyone who forgot one in the back. RE and childcare will be provided if we have kids today. Yep, by Nancy Reed and Kaya Mouse. We'll be collecting the cards for joys and sorrows after our first hymn. Please fill them out or type them in the chat box on Zoom if you have something you'd like to share. We have a couple other announcements. Early voting is open now. Check your county board of elections for times and locations. There are cards for early voting for Ontario County in the entryway. And are there any other announcements?
Yes. I want to announce that the board is hosting a pie sale after a pie and treat sale as a fundraiser for the church the Sunday before Thanksgiving after the service on November 20th. So if you're interested in pie and treats and supporting our church, definitely show up on November the 20th. If you're interested in making pies or treats to support our church, contact Karen, who is right there, and also whose email address will be in the coming chalice on November 1st.
Okay, and we have one more announcement. Nash Bach, the executive director for our local Habitat for Humanity, is here to share about this season's service partners. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to come speak with you today. It's wonderful to be here with you in person and to see some old friends and hopefully make some new ones today as well. As was said, I'm Nash Bach. I'm the executive director for Habitat for Humanity of Ontario County. And we've been working in this community for just over 30 years, helping to ensure that families have the opportunity to own a decent, safe, and affordable home. I wanted to start this morning by sharing with you a story of one of our families. This is a woman named Jennifer. And Jennifer is a single mom. And about 3 years or so ago, when she came to Habitat, she was living in Geneva. Most of her children had grown up and moved out, except for her youngest daughter, who was still living with her at the time. And Jennifer had recently learned that her 3 nephews, who were, I believe, 18 months, 7, and 10 or 11 at the time, were in foster care somewhere down towards New York City. And Jennifer took the brave step to do what was needed to become a foster parent for her nephews and bring them into her home, and over time work towards adopting the children formally. Unfortunately, Jennifer was at that time living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Geneva. If you can quickly do the math, 3 nephews, Jennifer, her oldest daughter, that's 5 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. But this was all that Jennifer could afford. Not only was it all that she could afford, but the house itself was in poor condition. The windows leaked in the wintertime, so it was cold and drafty. There was moisture damage and rot in the bathroom, so the floors were squishy. The heating and utility bills were very costly. And to make room for the family, Jennifer partitioned off part of the living room so that her and the youngest nephew, the toddler at that time, lived in part of the living room, and then the other children shared the 2 remaining bedrooms. This was all right before March of 2020. So if you can imagine, you've got 3 children in school, an infant at home, not enough space to begin with, and suddenly the world shuts down and you're trying to do remote learning and everything within this tiny apartment, it became immediately clear to Jennifer that this was not a tenable situation, that she needed to provide a better home for her family. And it was through her caseworker, through the adoption agency, that suggested she come talk with Habitat. And so she did. And she worked with our program manager, Pam, here in Canandaigua, and she qualified for a home. Now, at this time, we were also somewhat shut down and not working at the pace that we typically do with our volunteers due to COVID. But Jennifer was patient and she was hardworking. When volunteer opportunities became available again, she got right out there and worked on her home and those of other families in our program. She completed sweat equity hours doing financial education, for first-time home buyer education, and saving towards that home that she needed for her family. It took a while, but earlier this summer, Jennifer was able to move into their new home in Farmington, which I'm delighted is just around the corner from my house. So I gained some wonderful neighbors. The house has 5 bedrooms. It's been fully rehabbed. It was an existing home that was donated to Habitat through a national bank, excuse me. And we were able to go in with our volunteers, essentially gut the home because it didn't meet current building codes and standards, upgrade all the energy efficiency on the home so that the cost of living in the house will be affordable long-term, add those additional bedrooms, and create a space that's really welcoming and supportive of Jennifer and her family. So we celebrated with them earlier this summer as they moved into their home, and we celebrated again with Jennifer just about 2 weeks ago when she finally closed on that home and signed those mortgage documents and became an official Habitat homeowner. I'm blessed in that I get to work with these families every day, but in Jennifer's case, I get to drive past her home every morning and I see the children out waiting for the bus and the smiles on their face. And I know that they have a decent, safe, and affordable place to call home. I've talked with Jennifer and she is just so delighted to have not only a quality place for her family to live, but the stability of owning her own home and knowing that the rent isn't going to be adjusted on her in a month or two and she may have to look for another place to live. This is her home. I see her out there mowing the lawn and taking pride in her neighborhood and connecting with the neighbors down the street. That is what our work is about. That is what you all make possible, because Habitat truly is a community organization. It's our volunteers, donors, and community supporters that make the work of Habitat possible. And so we're grateful to be part of this community and to be able to do that work with all of you. In addition to Jennifer, we're working with several other families currently. We have a project that is, a house that is complete and we'll be dedicating this coming Sunday, a week from today in Canandaigua on Buffalo Street. If any of you would like to join us there with the new homeowner, Christine, and her son, Jay, we're excited to be dedicating that home as well. We're also working on a rehab in Hopewell right now, another existing home that needs some updates so that we can get that ready for another family. And we have a house under construction in Honeoye as well. Now, Habitat is probably best known for our home building efforts, but we also do a lot of other work to support families and support housing in the community. It's not just about creating new homes, it's about preserving our existing homes and helping families make smart choices to be able to afford their living situations. So we have a partnership with the city of Canandaigua where we do home repairs for existing homeowners. We have another partnership with the Ontario County Office for the Aging, where we do ramps, grab bars, and other modifications to homes to help our existing residents live safely in their home for a long period of time. In addition to those programs, we also have our HOPE program, which is supported by the United Way and allows us to work with individuals on a path towards homeownership or perhaps on other financial goals. So through the HOPE program, we can work on rebuilding credit, budgeting. We've had families come to us that needed to help with their finances so that they could afford a car so they could get to work and do the things that they need to do to take care of their families. So through that program, we're able to expand our reach and support families because we know that it's not just about a house. It's about all those different pieces that go together in being able to afford a decent home. Prior to the pandemic, an estimated 1 in 5 households, families in New York State paid more than half of their income towards housing, more than half. So for every dollar they were bringing home, half of that, 50 cents of that, was going just to provide a roof over their head. And for renters, folks that rent their home, that amount jumps up to almost half of all renters in our community and across the state are spending half of their income on housing. It's truly not affordable and forces families to make really tough decisions between a roof over their head, food on the table, healthcare, extracurriculars for children, clothing, and other essential needs. We have a really dire housing need in our community, and that's only gotten worse through the pandemic. And so we are working as an organization and with our community partners and with all of you to build our capacity and do more. I'm really excited to share with you, and perhaps you've already heard through some of the news that has been out, that we as an organization are joining forces with Flower City Habitat for Humanity in Rochester and Wayne County Habitat for Humanity to become one organization that will serve the full 3-county area. And through that work, we're going to be able to impact even more families here in Ontario County and in the other 2 communities as well. That work won't start in earnest until sometime after the first of the year, but we're really excited to be coming together with the amazing teams in those 2 communities to impact more families in need. So you might be asking yourself this morning, how can you help? How can you get involved? The obvious way to many folks is coming out and swinging a hammer or painting or helping on a house. But there are many other ways that you can assist Habitat and the families in our communities as well. Of course, financial support is always needed, but you can also donate or shop at our Restore on County Road 10 in Canandaigua, where we take in goods from the community and we resell them to help raise funds for our organization. In addition, just being an advocate for affordable housing, talking to your friends and neighbors, talking to your local representatives, your state representatives, and letting them know that housing is important for your community, that there are families right here in Canandaigua, in Ontario County, in New York, that need affordable housing, but it is just out of reach for them. And so we need to enact policies that support the creation of additional homes and support families that need that hand up to access housing. And so I thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I'm going to be sticking around after the service today to visit and chat with anyone if you have questions or things like that. But I really appreciate all that you do for the community and for sharing this time with me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nish. Are there any other announcements? Okay. As we prepare to be fully together, I remind us all to silence our phones and devices, and we now enter a space of worship. I invite you now to join me in our chalice lighting words as a flame is lit. Oops. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
celebrate the losses, changes, and big transitions of our last year. First, I want to tell you a story. I am a summer person, and maybe even more so an early fall person. I love a warm day with just a hint of brisk breeze, nothing colder. I would like to wear jeans and a t-shirt every day of the year. And so I always get a little sad when we start to wake up to frost on the ground and when it gets dark just as we're coming home from work and fall starts to turn into winter. But a few years ago, I filled my front yard gardens with my favorite flower in the whole world, dahlias. And if you grow dahlias, like maybe if you're Pat Mills and you grew these dahlias right here, you know that like me, dahlias are not indigenous to this area. They are native to Mexico, and to keep them year by year, you have to dig up the tuberous roots of the dahlias and store them somewhere warmer than our ground stays for the winter. And if you grow dahlias, maybe you also know that you have to wait before digging up those roots for a hard frost, a frost hard enough for those plants to die back. And you have to wait while your dahlias are producing still these big, beautiful armfuls of bouquets of flowers. They really go out with a bang. And so I have become a person, a summer person, an early fall at best person. I have now become a person who prays for a hard frost so that I can dig up those roots and tuck them safely away for the winter. Last year, I waited and prayed for a hard frost until November, way up there by Ontario Lake. It was Thanksgiving week as I dug up those roots, one of the latest hard frosts we've ever had in Rochester. And as I did, thinking, holding in my heart all of the sorrow around the climate crisis that pushed that frost a month back from where it used to be, thinking about tucking these dahlia roots with so much hope into their little coffins to sit for the winter. And by coffins, I mean plastic Tupperware containers filled with peat moss, praying over them that they will survive to bloom another year. And it felt like going to church, a very muddy, cold church. And I think that's why we come to church. This is a place where it's okay to acknowledge that we all can learn from the earth's lesson, that we need a time of dying back, of letting go, of pulling down when it comes to our energy and our nutrients, of pulling that in deep rest so that we can flourish in the coming season. We need a community where we mark those big doorway moments, those transition moments of birth, of marriage, of death together, where we hold witness to those things for one another and say, yes, this transition was real, and yes, it mattered. I'm so glad to be in this community, marking those transitions with all of you. As we begin our service this morning, I invite you, whether you're here or in Zoom, to rise in body or in spirit and to sing together our opening hymn, number 101, Abide with Me.
Oh
Friends, we are a community that holds one another in our celebrations and in our pain. In our joys and in our sorrows, we say to one another, we are with you. So I invite you, if you have joys or sorrows on your heart this morning, to pass forward the paper you've written them on, or to write them now and pass forward your joys and sorrows. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can type them into the chat and they will be passed up for you. Are there joys or sorrows to lift up this morning? Now it's time for a story. And this morning you're in luck, you actually get 3 stories. I want to tell you, on this day about death and dying and destruction, 3 creation stories. There are creation stories in nearly every culture. Sometimes some cultures have many creation stories all around the world, and 3 of them I'd like to tell you today. The first one is one of the many Hindu creation stories, and it goes like this. In short form. In the beginning, there was an ocean of nothing. And Brahma opened his eyes. And that moment was the first moment of this universe. He held in his hands a golden egg. And the gods decided to crack open the golden egg. And as he did, out poured the world as we know it, taking shape in water and land, forming an entire planet and then an entire cosmos, all the creatures and plant life on the planet and maybe elsewhere in the universe poured out of Brahma's broken egg. And there became the world in this version. The second creation story is from the Babylonian myth, from the Enuma Elish. And it goes like this. There were some gods, or depending on who's telling the story, maybe one god named Marduk, who decided to go and fight this giant, ancient sea goddess named Tiamat. We borrow this story, we readers of the Bible, borrow this story in Genesis 1, and we call Tiamat waters of the deep. But in the Babylonian version, she has a name, Tiamat. And she is a giant sea goddess who is terrible and awesome and powerful and shaped like a clam, like you might expect a sea goddess to be. And Marduk, or maybe Marduk and some helpers, go and battle the sea goddess. They win the battle, they tear her apart. The top half of the clam becomes the dome of sky above the earth. And the bottom shell of the clam becomes the dome of earth underneath the sky, and thereby the world was born. You maybe hear some echoes of the first chapter of the Bible. And the third creation story goes like this. At the beginning of time, all matter and all energy in the universe was a singularity, condensed into a single point in space. And outside of that point, maybe nothingness, until the pressure of that singularity built up, and the pressure became too much, and then bang, it spread apart, matter flying across the universe, converging into planets and stars and galaxies, and is still spreading today. Maybe you noticed that each of these creation stories takes place on the ground of a great destruction story. We'll hold that juxtaposition with us as we worship this morning.
Now is the time in our service to join together in the spiritual practice of generosity. Our gifts of both time and money support our church in its work. While we collect our contributions, I'd also like to spotlight our community connections. And thank you, Pat Mells, for creating a bulletin board in the back of the church with all of our community connections. So I'm going to talk about that while Thomas collects our donations. So each week we are going to spotlight a group or committee, thank them for their gift of time, and invite others who are interested to join them in supporting our church and programs. This week, the group is Buildings and Grounds. People interested in finding out more about how to help our buildings and grounds stay together and healthy, please contact Brandon for leaf blowing off the roof this season. Or putting the gardens to bed. You can contact me and I'll connect you with someone who's helping do that. In addition, 1/4 of our plate collection for the harvest season is going to, as we know, Habitat for Humanity, an organization that we've learned about more today that builds strength, stability, and self-reliance through shelter. If you're joining us from home or visiting by YouTube, you can donate by going to canandaiguauu.org/connection/donate or mail a check to UUCC at 3024 Cooley Road, Canandaigua. In any case, please make a note that your gift is intended for today's offering.
Friends, we are holding lots of sorrow this morning. Let's take a deep breath together so that we can hold it all. We're sitting with a dear friend who has a diagnosis of cancer, sadness at the loss of a pet after a sudden illness. A second friend also battling cancer for some time. Sitting with the sorrow for a migrant woman who's in imminent danger of losing a leg because of health complications. Some joy from Melissa that her grandmother's home and healing well, and at all the cows outside on the way this morning. And a joyful visit that Pat and Bill lift up from their Slovak exchange daughter. And with all of these things in our hearts and all of these things that we hold silently still, we say to one another, we are with you. Let us say it now. We are with you. And I'll drop one stone in the water for all of these joys and sorrows and for all those left in the silence of our hearts. Let us come now into a time of centering and meditation, followed by some shared silence. So take a moment to get comfortable in your seat. Maybe your feet find the floor, your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let's take another deep breath together and release it with a sigh. This morning's words of centering are by Mary Oliver. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this. the fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends upon it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. Amen. I'd like to offer a reading by Aaron Freeman called "You Want a Physicist to Speak at Your Funeral." You want a physicist to speak at your funeral, he writes. You want the physicist to talk to your grieving family about the conservation of energy, so they will understand that your energy has not died. You want the physicist to remind your sobbing mother about the first law of thermodynamics, that no energy gets created in the universe and none is destroyed. You want your mother to know that all your energy, every vibration, every BTU of heat, every wave of every particle that was ever her beloved child remains with her in this world. You want the physicist to tell your weeping father that amid the energies of the cosmos, you gave as good as you got. And at one point, you'd hope that the physicist would step down from the pulpit and walk to your broken-hearted spouse there in the pew and tell him that all the photons that ever bounced off your face, all the particles whose paths were interrupted by your smile, by the touch of your hair, hundreds of trillions of particles, have raced off like children, their ways forever changed by you. And as your widow rocks in the arms of a loving family, may the physicist let her know that all the photons that bounced from you were gathered in the particle detectors that are her eyes, that those photons created within her constellations of electromagnetically charged neurons whose energy will go on forever. And the physicist will remind the congregation of how much all of our energy is given off as heat. There may be a few fanning themselves with programs, as he says it. And he will tell them that the warmth that flowed through you in life is still here, still part of all that we are, even as we who mourn continue the heat of our own lives. And you'll want the physicist to explain to those who loved you that they need not have faith. Let them know they can measure, that scientists have measured precisely the conservation of energy and found it accurate, verifiable, consistent across space and time. You can hope your family will examine the evidence and satisfy themselves that the science is sound, and they'll be comforted to know your energy's still here. According to the law of the conservation of energy, not a bit of you is gone. You're just less orderly. Amen. These past few years, we have shared our small group and worship themes with First Unitarian in Rochester, and our worship staffs get together in June to brainstorm the list of themes for our upcoming year. And every year, as we start to discuss the harvest season where this Sunday falls, Reverend Sherry from First Unitarian suggests death and glory as the theme for it, and I'm all for it. For some reason, the other religious professionals just haven't loved the idea. And okay, to be fair, death in particular alongside glory is a bit much to drop on a congregation without a whole lot of context. But I do think we are called in this harvest season to get a little better acquainted with death. Death is not something we tend to feel comfortable with in this culture. Our dominant culture, particularly the culture of our system of medicine, frames death as an enemy to defeat or be defeated by. We often talk in terms of battling cancer and fighting disease. We have characterized the whole pandemic as a war with healthcare workers on the front lines or in the trenches, which tells us as much about how disposable we think healthcare workers are as it does about how our fear of death tries to turn every moment of healing or care into a battleground. And I wonder whether if we can be friends with death, or at least refuse to make death our enemy, we might find more fullness in our living. There is so little that we know for certain, but this one solid, immovable truth is so hard for us to hold. We are going to die. It is the one truth we can be sure of. A time of death will come for us and for everyone else. And to run away from that truth or to rail against it with all our might robs us of richness and presence in the short, precious lives we have before it does. Our tradition here of remembering loss on this Sunday comes halfway between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice. So as we sit on the fulcrum of autumn, in this liminal space between abundant growth of summer and the dying back of winter, we, like so many ancestors, take a moment now to greet death on our doorstep. We confront our fears about death and dying by scaring ourselves on purpose, by dressing like ghosts and zombies, embracing the growing dark. We dare to invite death into our lives in playful delight for a short season, because maybe if we can do that, we can face its power over our whole lives. Maybe we can make death a friend. As I have prepared spiritually for this season, this year, I have been leaning into a concept in Hindu theology that destruction and creation follow one another in an endless cycle. We heard this common thread in our stories this morning, our creation stories, and it shows up in the Hindu mythos over and over. One world is destroyed for a new world to be created on the ground of the old world's death. And we see it in the prophetic language of the earth. The seasons follow one another in an endless cycle. The death of a tree in the forest means the flourishing of new life for composting insects, microbes, fungi, newborn plants. Our own lives are sustained by the deaths of so many living things, and our deaths will mean new life for other creatures too. We're working on some programming here at UUCC this winter around preparing for our own deaths, financially, medically, and spiritually. This is important planning and spiritual work, but terribly often we neglect it because it feels like a defeat for us to talk or even think about death. We find it hard to have conversations with our loved ones, right? About the one and only thing that all we creatures will inevitably face. It's crucial to talk and think and even pray about death together in community, because part of honoring the interdependent web of life means honoring the death that is a part of that web. And I promise I'm not here to preach at you, make not an enemy of death, like it's so easy. It isn't. I know it isn't. And saying that destruction always precedes creation doesn't mean we aren't allowed to have our feelings of sorrow about destruction while we're in it. Creation may be born out of death and destruction, but that doesn't make the death and destruction any easier. Even if we get comfortable with the idea of our own death, it isn't easy. We've made an enemy of death because death takes from us. Death turns our love into grief. And I know, no matter what a physicist says at your loved one's funeral, the continuity of their energy is little comfort when they are no longer orderly enough to hold your hand or smile at you or tell you stories. There is deep and real sorrow in death that is not erased by our being friends with it. And grief can bring meaning to our lives, to our living, as much as joy or communion can, maybe more so. Because so much of the preciousness of life is born out of a clear-hearted understanding that it is impermanent. So much of the soul-deep joy of loving is in the learning how to let go. So I want to invite you into a time of letting go, a time of honoring all that we have had to let go of this year. First, we'll start with loved ones we have lost to death. I will light 3 candles first for members who have died in the last year, for Sam Hall, for Randy Pauly, and for Harry Schwartzweiler. And then I'll invite you to come forward as you feel moved, to light a candle here below in honor of someone you've lost. You can do so silently, or you can quietly speak their name, which I'll repeat into the microphone. If you're joining us on Zoom, feel free to type a name into the chat and we will light a candle for you here. Who have lost loved ones this year, I invite you forward. Light a candle for them as you feel moved. For Arthur. For David. For John. For Linda. For Nick. For Jen. As the candles burn, I want to invite you forward one more time, as you feel moved, to drop a pebble in the water here and release any other losses, changes, and big transitions you've gone through this year. You can quietly name it as you do, or drop your pebble silently. Folks on Zoom can type their losses or changes into the chat, and we will drop a pebble for you here. When you are up front, you might take a leaf from our tree or from the table here, choosing one that represents new creation you hope to see growing on the ground of your loss. Whatever new life and growth you might hope to show up for you in the coming year. Please come forward if you have change, loss, or transitions to honor. Let us hold on to these leaves, tuck them somewhere safe and dark through the winter, whether it's a coffin of Tupperware and peat moss or the bottom of your sock drawer, the dashboard of your car. And learn well from the trees who release their own creation in glorious death each year, just how beautiful letting go can be. May it be so.
When my body won't hold me anymore, and it's finally lets me free, will I be ready? When my feet won't walk another mile, and my lips get their last kiss goodbye, will my hands be steady? When I lay down my fears, my hopes and my doubts, the rings on my fingers and the keys to my house, with no hard feeling. When the sun hangs low in the west and the light in my chest won't be kept and held at bay any longer. When the jealousy fades away and it's ash, dust, cash and lust, and it's just hallelujah and love in thoughts and love in the words, love in the songs they sing in the church with no hard feeling. Lord knows they haven't done much good for anyone. Kept me afraid and cold. So much to have and hold. When my body won't hold me anymore, and finally lets me free, where will I go? Will the trade winds take me south to the Georgia grave, tropical rain, the snow from the heaven? Will I join with the ocean blue, or run into the Savior true, shake hands laughing, and walk through the night straight to the light, holding the love I hold in my heart, Lord knows they haven't done much good for anyone. Kept me afraid and cold. So much to have and hold. Under the curving sky, I'm finally learning why it matters for you, me and you. Say it and mean it too. Life in its loveliness and all of its ugliness, good as it's been to me, I have no enemy. I have no enemy. I have no enemy. I have no enemy.
May we make no enemies in our living and our loving. And when the time comes, may we make no enemies in our letting go. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join me in singing our closing hymn 411 in the gray hymnal, Part in Peace.
Please join me in our words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.